Welcome, folks, and my name is Robert Wojtowicz, and I am the Associate Dean for Research and Graduate Studies in Arts and Letters. But I began my career here at Old Dominion University as an assistant professor of art history, and then associate professor, and then on to professor. And so I've had a long career, and in that time frame, I've sat on more search committees than I care to count, but let's just say that they're numerous, and for all kinds of positions, mostly faculty, but occasionally administrative positions as well. And so I'd like to go over some real basics, especially in terms of what the process is like, how to look for a position, and then if you are fortunate enough to receive an interview, what that may be like as well. So I will take this and I'll go like this. So questions that we're going to start with have to do with first the calendar, then the role that the search committee plays, types of institutions, types of positions, where to find positions, how to read a position advertisement, and then what you should include in the application and how to prepare for the interview. And so first with the calendar. Positions are generally advertised according to the academic year. And so most institutions follow a semester system, although some follow what we call a quarter system. With the semester system, you begin the academic year with fall, then there's generally a spring semester. There can be a variation where you'd have a fall semester, maybe there would be a small winter semester of about 3 weeks, spring semester, and then if there's a quarter system, there would be essentially a 10-week fall, a 10-week winter, and then maybe 2 10-week springs. I've actually never taught at an institution that's on the quarter system, and most seem to be moving more toward a semester system, so just kind of keep that in mind. I mention all of this to say that advertisements most often appear late in the summer, generally around July and August. Occasionally they'll appear in November, December. Sometimes they'll appear in the springtime. And for positions that are planned and have a kind of typical interviewing schedule, those are the ones that are generally advertised in July and August. If someone departs a university somewhat suddenly and there's a chance to do an abbreviated search, that's when the position might appear as late as December or January. And then if you see a position appearing very late, let's say April or May, it may be that it's critical to get a temporary position in place, and so that advertisement will then circulate. For tenure and tenure track, think about essentially a late summer kind of posting, and then for the other kinds of positions, and it's the savvy applicant who just keeps his or her eye on the calendar at all times, because you have to plan for every eventuality. And it may be that the temporary position leads to a full-time position. It may be that the one-year position keeps you fresh on the market for the next position. Or sometimes that emergency hire turns out to be a windfall. And so be aware of that. Second is who or what is a search committee? And as a graduate student, occasionally you may participate in the search process. It's very rare to be actually a search committee member, but occasionally it does happen. Essentially, a search committee is made up of faculty peers who are selecting a new colleague. Remember, though, some departments are very broad in terms of the discipline. And so, for example, let's choose psychology. Yes, everyone is a psychologist who is tenured in that department, but there are different subdisciplines within the field, and it could be that multiple subdisciplines are represented by the membership of the committee. In our college, there are some rather unusual marriages of disciplines within a single department. So, for example, English includes literature, technical and professional writing, applied linguistics, creative writing, and I'm probably forgetting one other. In my own department, it's studio art, art education, and art history. In some cases, the title of the department will indicate, oh, here's a strange marriage, political science and geography. Again, in our college. So be aware of that. If a department's very small, for example, our women's studies department has two tenure lines, okay. To create a search committee of 3, someone has to be invited. To create a search committee of 5, more than one person has to be invited. And remember that search committees are often odd in number so that what doesn't happen? You don't want to tie in terms of voting on candidates to bring in, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So with that, let's go on to the next slide. What kind of institution is advertising? This is important in that you should be thinking about where you want to land and what kind of institution is a good fit. And I put up a number of university seals as a way of moving into this conversation. First, there are the public institutions. Those are essentially state-supported, state-affiliated. Sometimes you may hear the term state flagship institution. These are the ones that are dependent in some way on an appropriation from a state legislature. Okay, those are the publics. The privates can be fall into many different kinds of categories, and I just list the nonprofit, which would be, in this case, Howard and St. Louis. Public, in this case, would be Kent State, and often when you see the term state in the title, that would be, and forgive me if I'm saying obvious things, but I just kind of want to make sure that this is all clear. And a community college is generally going to be part of a state system. You may hear the old-fashioned term junior college, and occasionally those are private, a 2-year private college, but less so now. With the third section, I bring up faith-based because this is, again, an important consideration as you are making an application. So of the 4, which is the faith-based institution?
Do you want us to answer?
Yeah, please.
Okay.
Go ahead.
St. Louis?
St. Louis. Okay. Now, it's a little deceptive in that St. Louis is, of course, a major city, and the institution is in that city. But it's a case where St. Louis is a Jesuit university, and there are certain kinds of values placed at a Jesuit institution that may or may not be congruent with the way you're thinking. And I actually brought it in because my nephew attends there, and I've actually been to their campus. Very dynamic institution. Remembering, though, that often it may be a surprise if you arrive on campus and you didn't realize that University of Dayton in Ohio is also a Jesuit institution. You probably know that Georgetown is, but again, some of the religious colleges and universities have the denomination in their name, like Southern Methodist University. Sometimes they don't. Some institutions begin with a religious affiliation and then drop it. So many of the Methodist colleges that were formed in the 19th century may or may not have that strong thing. Okay, so I just mentioned that as part of your investigative process about the institution. And so if we go to the next slide, basic breakdown of the kinds of institutions that will be advertising. And so community colleges, I think, are familiar to most of us. That term junior college may pop up, and again, recognize that it's generally a two-year institution. There are standalone schools that are not necessarily colleges or universities, but they are schools of higher education. This is most often the case in, say, like art schools. The School of the Art Institute of Chicago awards bachelor's and master's degrees, but it's not part of a university. You may have noticed in the news that the Corcoran School of Art is now going to affiliate with George Washington University. They made that announcement a couple of days ago. Big thing, because for 100 years it's been an independent institution. There are some schools of nursing and medicine that are independent, and locally, of course, we have Eastern Virginia Medical School, which is not part of a university. A liberal arts college generally is going to be a four-year institution that may have one or two graduate programs connected, but their focus is on undergraduate education. A place like Williams College would be an example in Massachusetts. Okay, concert's over. Wheaton College would be another example. Grinnell College would be yet another example. Morehouse College would be another example, and so forth. There are some places that call themselves colleges but are secretly universities. William and Mary would be an example, where the charm of College of William and Mary is kept in the title, but in fact they have multiple graduate programs and actually an entirely separate law school, which would be graduate. There are polytechnical colleges, not a whole lot of them. Most of them have really grown into universities. But again, these are primarily engineering schools, places like Worcester and Rensselaer and Harvey Mudd and standalone engineering schools. And then, of course, the research universities, which have different kinds of Carnegie doctoral classifications, but this is where the largest numbers of programs are aggregated into multiple colleges, and the profile tends to be much larger than the other schools that I've mentioned. Okay, so within the hierarchy of advertisements, there are a number of different categories, and I'll start with the part-time categories, which are places to look for, of course, when you are either unable to find a full-time position or life circumstances prevent you from looking for a full-time position. And the kinds of titles will generally be a clue as to whether it's full or part-time, or now with searchable websites, you can filter out full-time from part-time, et cetera, et cetera. So anything with the term adjunct, instructor, lecturer, even through the ranks of assistant associate, full professor, and generally clinical professors are part-time positions. Temporary full-time, this is something to keep an eye on. Again, as you are casting your net very widely, it may be that there aren't very many full-time opportunities in your field this cycle. But if you see the term visiting, and that's the term that's generally used, it means that you are replacing someone for a year. Someone has departed somewhat suddenly, or someone is taking a research leave of some sort, and so they need to fill that spot for 10 months. Okay, these are very often very good stepping stones to other kinds of positions. There are permanent but non-tenure track positions, and these fall under the categories of instructor and lecturer. And at our university, there's an additional rank of senior lecturer. This is someone who is in a teaching position only, but has significant experience and rank at the institution. Permanent full-time tenure track then falls under the category of assistant professor. And this is almost universally the term that will be used, the assistant professor position, and then moving through the tenure and promotion ranks, associate professor, and you'll sometimes hear the word full professor, but really that just means professor. Okay, any questions? Good. Okay. So, where to find the advertisement? This is evolving constantly, but I think the fail-safe place to look is going to be the Chronicle of Higher Education. This is the national newspaper for our field. You can go to the Chronicle website and you can enter the job section without a subscription. This is nice, and they haven't put a firewall up yet. I worry about the day that they do, but back in the day you had to subscribe to it before you could get the listings. So that's kind of a nice thing that's happened in the transition to digital communication. There are many listservs that are, there are many websites that are used with increasing frequency. Here at Old Dominion, we place advertisements routinely on higheredjobs.com. Another good place to look. The third would be any electronic listserv connected to your discipline. Okay, MLA, APA, for my field, College Art Association, and so on and so on. And inevitably, an institution will require multiple listing placements. And so the same ad that appears in the Chronicle will appear in the MLA listserv, et cetera, et cetera. But you've got a lot of places to look. Okay, so I pulled some job advertisements from the Chronicle this week, and I think at this point, Shelley, I can actually get up, right? Because you don't need to see me. The Chronicle's redesigned its website since the last time I had been on. So what's kind of nice is that the listing is accompanied by a Google map, so you don't have to wonder where the heck is Immaculata, Pennsylvania. Well, in fact, it's west of Philadelphia and north of, actually, it's just really west of Philadelphia. It's kind of northeast of Baltimore, I guess. Okay. It also sorts the information right at the top of the ad. And so here we've got a rolling deadline. We have a posting date. This is interesting. It is a tenured or tenure track position. Interesting, but they're advertising it in February. This strikes me as a situation where someone must have left for a position maybe starting January 1st, and they are really anxious to fill it quickly. They don't tell us the salary. Often they won't. And so, except in high demand fields where the salary is the recruitment tool. And is anyone here from the College of Business and Public Administration? No. Oh, you are? Okay. So routinely in accounting and finance and business administration departments, I will see a salary posted. And generally it runs around $125,000, $130,000, which we can only dream of in arts and letters. But clearly that's the norm for a business ad. But in arts and liberal arts, in sciences, even in engineering, they often will hide that information, or they won't disclose it until the time of the interview. Okay, now, Immaculata should send off a kind of a signal in your head. Immaculate sounds like there's a kind of connection, and in fact, it is a religious university, Catholic affiliated, west of the city. Joyce, your question.
I know that place.
Yeah.
They'll start an associate at about 40.
At a 40, an associate at 40. Okay, now, cost of living in Immaculata, PA, which is really a blip on the map, is going to be very low. But 40 is not a very competitive salary, I would say. What I remember of the institution is that it was founded as a women's college, but mainly for the training of women in the novitiate and then the sisterhood. And so it has that real focus, although it has expanded, it has become co-ed in recent years. There will be language about job responsibilities, about expectations regarding teaching, scholarship, service, and they want to start that in August. Okay, so they are aggressively recruiting. I pulled a community college ad, and this one I found a little somewhat interesting because I'm not as familiar with the community college system or systems nationally, but not all of them offer tenure or tenure track positions. Often it is part-timers with maybe one or two faculty who sort of steer the department. In this case, they are looking for someone who is tenure track, and it's one of those cases where there's clearly a program in the humanities where they have faculty teaching art and music and theater and dance, and so you would be kind of put together with a diverse group of people, diverse interests, and there are certain kinds of challenges in that kind of department that everyone should be aware of. You don't have immediate colleagues necessarily to converse with or share ideas with, although in an interdisciplinary way it can be somewhat exciting in that you do have diverse colleagues to share ideas and information with. So just be aware of that. Now
Quickly
here,
add,
yeah,
sometimes they
please.
don't call tenure by tenure either in CC jobs. But it's tenure, but it's not called.
It's not
for
called tenure. So in
yeah.
other words, there's the expectation of a recurring appointment,
Yes.
an annual reappointment. Okay, now here's the part where I forgot to undo the filter, or did I? Let's see. No, I did. No, I'm good here. Okay, I found an engineering position, but I will tell you there were very few engineering positions up right now. So this is as of this week. And this one happened to be, again, at a community college, and Ulster County is in upstate New York, and not terribly far upstate, but you can see it's just sort of, do I have a thing here? Oh, here we go, there we go. It's in the Hudson River Valley, right here, and it's very curious in that the way that the advertisement reads. And let me explain. Some states have what we call federated systems of universities. Okay. So that, for example, here in Virginia, every four-year institution supported by the state is autonomous. In North Carolina, there is a federated system. So Chapel Hill is the main campus, but you have Greenville and you have Charlotte, and you have some smaller campuses that are under the same chancellorship. In New York, the state system is called SUNY, State University of New York, and they also federate the community college system into the SUNY system. And so the language here is kind of, I wouldn't say misleading, but clearly they are focusing on the sort of larger connection. So they're calling it SUNY Ulster, which makes it sound like it's a four-year campus, but it's not really. And on. The advertisement tells us about job responsibilities and duties. Fourth one, and I hit the adjunct button by mistake in this case, but here we have a part-time position. It is revealed as such, and I'm sorry to point out that the salary, for this position is posted, and it appears to be, I think, $700 per credit, if I'm reading that correctly. And so at least you know what you're getting into if you apply for this job. Okay. And Laramie, in this case, I would guess is going to be a pretty low cost of living place, but you're not going to want to move there for $700 per credit hour. Okay, just that would be my advice personally. I doubt they're paying relocation costs either. Okay, so what do you put in the application? First is pretty obvious, but if they ask for something, include it. If they don't ask for something, I wouldn't pad it. No committee likes to receive a box that has to be sorted through and eventually returned. So please keep that in mind. The cover letter, I would recommend, should not exceed 2 pages. And my faculty colleagues may have a differing position there, but I find in a search committee, you are reading through lots of applications. You want the information to be up front, and if it's a 5-page letter, the information is going to get lost. Okay, so be concise and be very organized in the information that you provide. Indicate that you have the experience in the background. Not that you can become the person that they want. You are the person that they want. Okay? And if you find yourself writing a letter that says you can become that person, maybe it's time to look at a different path. Okay? The third point, and again for my faculty colleagues, in arts and letters, we like to see a teaching philosophy. And I'm guessing across the social sciences, this would be the norm. In business, probably as well, but maybe not so much in some other fields. So I'll be curious about the discussion there. But in any case, indicating what kind of methodology you use in your research, how you apply it to teaching, how you encourage student success, all of the kinds of things that indicate you've thought through your persona in the classroom and how you're going to make that connection with students. If they ask for letters of reference, provide them. If they ask for names, provide the names. It's not a bad idea maybe to have the letters sent anyway, but again, having been in a search committee situation, sometimes a letter arriving weeks before the application comes in is a bit confusing. So send them if requested. If not, you could probably hold back. And if they ask for anything else. Preparing for the interview, and I'll wrap this up now. Make sure you undertake your own research. Do not rely only on the links that they provide. Do as much as you can in terms of preparing yourself for an on-campus interview. What is the student body like? What is the atmosphere like? If there are any news articles, they will pop up on a basic Google search. It's important to know that if the university's administration is in trouble with an accrediting body, what that means. Or if you can find glowing information, that's reassuring and all to the good. Anticipate what the questions will be. Practice, 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 practice. Ideally with someone from your program, possibly with your faculty mentor, but generally I think with your fellow students. Have them pretend to be a search committee and begin asking you questions, and this will only make you more confident going into the actual process. If there's a presentation that is requested, usually it has to do with some aspect of your research, but some institutions, say a 4-year liberal arts college, might say, please prepare a sample lecture. And you're going to come in and...
Closer to the mic, we're hearing. Thank you.
I'm sorry. Okay. Prepare a sample lecture. You're going to take over for Professor so-and-so in her class this morning. And part of that student feedback may weigh into the committee's decision. Now, save your presentation multiple times. I emailed mine to Lee earlier in the week. I emailed it to myself today. What I forgot to do, though, was put it in my flash drive. Okay, so I came today, and happily, we had already preloaded it. But having as many possible backups is good. Okay, dress appropriately. If your faculty colleagues, generally during a search process, your faculty colleagues will be dressing a little better than they normally do. Okay, they want to make a good impression as to you. Depending on your field, though, for guys, a jacket and tie might be too much, but certainly, a t-shirt would be too little. For women, the line is a little more difficult to gauge, and I might defer to my colleagues about that in the Q&A. I will ask you today, though, I am completely colorblind, so I am always guessing what I should wear. And so Shelley informed me that I missed today with a jacket, shirt, tie.
I think it's less about the color and more about your patterns.
Too many patterns?
Too many
Oh, yeah, I
patterns.
love too many patterns.
Too many patterns.
Really? So the colors are okay? What do you think?
Well,
Okay, you
not
know-
turning the wheel.
Okay, but here's the point. You don't want to be distracted, but you don't want to distract people sitting across the table from you thinking, what the heck did he wear that tie with that shirt? It's like too good. All of that. Dress conservatively, be well dressed, but not noticeably dressed, I would say. And a thank you note goes a long way. And I would say the email is good if you can get someone's address and write a handwritten note. People remember that. They do. They absolutely do. And relax. Okay. And now I really will wrap up. Is the institution a good fit? You'll know, I think, by the time you're on campus, by the time the end of the day wraps up. Could you work with these people? Does the place feel right? Does the city or the rural location feel right? And was the welcome a warm one? And chat to as many people as you can, to students in the hallway, to other administrators, to housekeeping staff, to whatever, so that you can gather the information that you need to make a good decision. And with that, that's it.
Well, thank you, Robert.
Sure.
We were also planning to have a faculty member talk about the search committee perspective. Unfortunately, he was unable to make it. So what we might just then do is during the Q&A, we can talk a little bit more. The panelists can share their thoughts about serving on search committees. I think everybody on the panel and the other faculty members in the room have all served on the search committee, and we'd be more than happy to share our perspectives with you. But Richard Landers is here to talk about the technology.
Hi, everybody. So my name is Richard Landers. I'm over in the Department of Psychology. I'm an industrial organizational psychologist, and most of you have never heard of that. What that is a person who applies psychology to the workplace. So actually part of my research program is on the use of technology in the hiring process. I say that in order to give a little bit of framing to this, and that I'll be talking both from the perspective of what the research literature kind of speaks to in what you should be doing, and also in my own experience, having been on the job market in the 2008-2009 cycle, which in academic years is not that long ago. So I'm going to cover this in two basic kind of chunks. One in kind of pre-interview technology tips, the things that you should do during the search process, and then the other is when you're actually doing interviews, how can technology help you? This is going to be an actionable presentation, and I say that because I'm not going to give you the nuts and bolts of how to do most of these things, because it would take hours to actually talk through a lot of this. Instead, I'm going to give you kind of a broad overview of you could use technology in this way, you could use it in this way, here are things to worry about, and it's kind of up to you to follow up on those if you think that they're particularly relevant. The first of these areas that I wanted to talk about was how to fix past mistakes. So the hiring committee, at a minimum, someone is going to Google you. And if not the hiring committee, then someone in the department is going to Google you. And that's not necessarily good or bad. It's only really bad if you have something that's going to show up that you don't want people to see. So number one thing that you should do is scrub Facebook. Facebook is something that a lot of people are curious about. The research literature says that organizational hiring officers, they say in public that they don't check Facebook, but when you ask them in a survey that's anonymous, they do say they report Facebook. They look at Facebook. About 75% of people hiring for jobs look at Facebook. So you want to scrub it. Scrubbing it means one of four things. The very easiest of these, but the least effective, is managing carefully your privacy settings. Unless you're really up on privacy settings, I would not recommend that. It's very easy just to accidentally miss something, or for there to be something way back in your timeline that you don't remember about, some picture of you with a keg stand or something crazy. So much easier if you instead use one of the higher options. One is remove things that make you look bad. Just get rid of them. Delete them entirely. That's a little bit safer. Safer than that is changing your name. That's actually a really common approach. A lot of people will cut off their last name and then flip their first and middle. So I'm Richard Nathaniel Landers, so I might go by Nate Rich. That might be my new Facebook name while I'm trying to get hired. The other option, which If you're nervous about any of that, I would recommend it. Just delete your account. You don't need Facebook. It's a waste of time. Get rid of it. All right. So that's number one priority. Deal with that aspect of your presence. That will show up in Google, so don't think that just because you're not friends with anybody you think that is going to be on the hiring committee is going to see it. They can find it. It's there. You also don't know what weird connections you have. I call this the academic 3 degrees of separation. Maybe you're friends with your advisor, or you're friends with another person here, and they happen to be friends with somebody at the school that you're applying to, and they happen to be friends that they talk. You just never know what weird connections appear. So don't assume anything. Lock it down. Very straightforward. Rest of social media as well. Anything that you don't want showing up, get rid of it. I'm waiting for the day that some Twitter firestorm becomes the reason that somebody doesn't get hired, and we hear all in the news about how somebody's posted something on Twitter and didn't get a job, blah, blah, blah. It's happened in industry a couple times already, but it will eventually happen in academia. The other side is Google, and that's a lot harder to manage because anything you've ever done ever is probably on Google somewhere. There are ways to get rid of that. You can hire identity management firms if it's real bad. There are companies that will go through and try and send cease and desist requests to various people. If you really want to go down that route, sometimes a polite email sent to the person that owns a website is enough. So just look at your options. Google yourself. Very important. When doing that, though, also to keep in mind that Google has algorithms so that it gives to you what it thinks you're most likely to want to find from that search, which means the hiring committee Googling you and you Googling yourself are not necessarily going to produce the same answers. So just be cautious, be vigilant, and have everybody you know check, especially people in other states. The other is Rate My Professor. If you've taught, you probably have an account on Rate My Professor. Faculty say they don't care about Rate My Professor. However, if you talk to people that are making hiring decisions, especially if you're applying to the community college or to a small liberal arts college or something that's more teaching oriented, then they're going to check. Just accept that. Anything that's on there, it's a terrible website. The validity of this site in actually predicting teaching success is very poor. It does correlate with your ability to impress a group of students, like make them feel like they're having a happy, wonderful time, kind of that general subjective evaluation of whether you enjoyed an experience. It correlates with that. Doesn't correlate with learning. Doesn't correlate with any other outcome of interest, which we find important. So if you have bad ratings, don't worry about it in terms of that means something bad about me. But you should worry about it in terms of people that don't know that may evaluate you poorly as a result. So one option you do have is this guy right here. A lot of people don't know what that means. The Report This Rating, actually, Rate My Professor has a policy where they say if there's anything inflammatory, if there's anything that approaches, libel type stuff, if they're saying really like, I hate this person and I want them to die, like that kind of comment, then if you report it, they'll usually remove it. If it's just, I didn't like this class for this reason, then they won't. But in this case, if I thought that, cool dude was a bad comment, I could have chosen a bad one, but I didn't. That's, If I didn't think that cool dude was a reasonable comment, then I would report it, and then a day or two later, it might get removed. So that's your option on that side. If you do that, and then this changes to a check mark, there is no hope for you, because that means that comment is there, and unless you have a friend that works for this company, you're never going to get rid of it. Okay.
So Professor Neighbridge, that was your comment.
That
was a comment on yours.
Oh, that is on mine, yeah. Yeah, I take this is a random aside. I actually take a full forward, frontal assault on this, and I actually tell my classes, especially my online class, go rate. Go, everybody in this class, go make ratings. And the reason for that is because if you don't do that, then you're only going to get people that really love you or really hate you. So if you want all those middle responses, just tell them, just go. Just say, this is a terrible website, but just go rate anyway, so you get that nice kind of even split. That's just me, though. So professional presence is the next line. So that's how to clean up your reputation, but how do you build a good online reputation? You need a personal professional website. You need something. If you aren't confident in your web authoring abilities, I would recommend hiring somebody to do this. It's not as expensive as you would think. You can get a good, reasonable website for less than $100 if you want to. If you have any confidence in web authoring, which is not that hard these days, you can pay $5 a month and get something that essentially looks like Word, and you can basically design whatever you want your website to look like. You want this to be the first thing or second thing that shows up as somebody Googles your name. And there's a lot of variance on this. There's your name plus the school you're at. There's your name with middle initial, your name without middle initial. Those are all different variants that you might see. And you want this website to be one of the first or second things that pops up. You want to have that kind of control. The way that you do that is through something called SEO, search engine optimization, which is the process by which you make Google like your website as much as possible. The major way to do that is to link it from other sites. So if your advisor has a website, for example, say, please link to my personal professional website from your website. If you comment on public professional sources, like if you have, so my organization, Society of Biopsychology, has a blog. So every time that I post on that blog, I link back to my own website. That also increases your ranking on search engines. You just want as many things pointing back to you, to the site that you want it to point back to, as possible. This is essentially a web-friendly Vita, but with a little bit of personality. It's not quite as restrictive as an actual Vita, which has very set kind of structure. It should be consistent with the message that you send to every potential employer. That will become more important momentarily. This is the core of who you are as an academic, should be on this webpage. Backup things that you might want. LinkedIn is becoming increasingly important. It's not really vital at this point in academia just yet. It may in the future. Twitter presence doesn't hurt. That's going to matter more in some disciplines than other. For example, if you're in education, you'd better have a Twitter account at this point. That's just kind of a default for that group for some reason. This is my professional website, not the right part, but just the left part. This is, I know some web authoring. This took me maybe an hour to put together. If you have no authoring skills at all, this would probably take a couple days of dedicated effort to figure out how to put something like this together. It doesn't need to be complicated. This is essentially a Vita. If you scroll down, it's just lists of publications and that sort of thing. So very straightforward. All right.
I'd like to buy the book.
Oh, yes. Thank you. So the next piece, still pre-interview, how to actually find jobs. So you heard a little bit about this already. I'm going to give you a couple more resources. You want both discipline-specific resources and general resources. You have the discipline listservs, you have discipline websites, and you have conference listservs, all possible sources of information about jobs. Be on all of them. So in my field, for example, that means belonging to organizational behavior listserv for the Academy of Management, human resources listserv for the Academy of Management, belong to the SIOP. We have a, SIOP is that organization I mentioned earlier. We have a social media site for our society. That means being on part of that, getting notifications from that, etc. Sign yourself up for everything. Just spam the crap out of yourself with all these divisional stuff. You never know what random notification of a job you might find. General resources, you already heard a few. HigherEdJobs.com, careers.insidehighered.com. This one is really interesting because they actually have an option if you're part of an academic couple, which is a thing I would not wish on my worst enemy. But if you are, like I am, then you might find the dual career search option really useful. It helps you coordinate that. ChronicleVita.com is another, which is just the Chronicle of Higher Education again. But these are, even though these are the main listing sites, there are also some other techniques you might use. Google. If you're specifically targeting one school, Google the name of the school plus jobs. For research positions, that's less important because all of those big high-profile positions in research universities are going to be on these websites. But if you're like, I just want to work at a liberal arts college or community college in somewhere in southwest New York State, that kind of thing, go find the name of all those schools and search for jobs. Because those places don't always post their ads nationally. Sometimes they're going to be regional postings. Sometimes they're going to only be on their website. So if you're specifically targeting particular schools, look for them individually on their websites. If you're looking for adjunct work, which I wouldn't recommend unless you have to, but if you are looking for adjunct work, email department chairs directly. Sometimes they're just vaguely kind of looking for people to fill when they have temporary work available, and there's just a list. Our department has literally an email list that our folks just kind of go through and look through. Oh, we need somebody. Let's go through the list and see who's available. So if you want to be available for that kind of work, so say, for example, you moved to a particular city and you know there's 3 or 4 community colleges or liberal arts colleges around you that might have adjunct work and you want to pick up some extra money, then that's a really great way to do it. The other piece of pre-interview finding jobs is keeping track of jobs. This is like a grad school search on steroids. You are looking for a lot of information when you look for a job. And just use Excel, seriously. Just create an Excel a spreadsheet, and keep track of every detail that you can find about these organizations, for reasons that will become obvious in a second. So here's Higher Ed Jobs, just to give you an idea of what these kind of things look like. Basic ability to search by whatever random criteria you want. It's a basic kind of search, so nothing super surprising there. Inside Higher Eds, the dual careers option is right there. That's that little tab. Allows you to try to coordinate multiple job requirements if you need them. All right. So completing applications, next piece, where technology can really help. So you really want to, as you are crafting your cover letters, to think about what kind of collaborative opportunities you're trying that you would be able to engage in once you got there. So remember, the hiring process isn't about your worth or your value as an academic. It's really easy to flip into that, oh, they didn't want to hire me because I'm not good enough. Not really what it is. That's a little piece of it. Most of it is fit. When you come to this department, are you going to be a good colleague? Are you going to be able to contribute in a way that we are proud of? That's what they're looking for. So when you look at, when you're trying to put together your application, you actually need to look at really three kind of different things. The perspective of the hiring committee, the specific interests where you have matches, and the specific collaboration opportunities that might exist. You need to scour their websites for who you might see yourself potentially working with, talking to, being friends with, etc. when you get to that school. Every cover letter should be different. You should not have identical cover letters for 82 schools that you apply to, period. They need to be customized. And use the website to figure out this information. Remember, academics, I say academics, it's really everybody. Academics are selfish. They want to know, when you get there, what are you going to do for them? How are you going to help them out? How are you going to have research interests that are useful? How are they going to be able to come to you when they need help in an area that they're not familiar with? They're going to be thinking about these things when they read this application. So if you're hired, how will your colleagues benefit? Which research interests do you overlap with? Do you complement? And also compete with? If you have research interests substantially the same as someone that's already there, that's going to decrease the chance that they're going to want to bring you in. So you need to point out how you're different. You need to say that in your cover letter. What projects are they doing you're interested in? If, for example, you went to a school and they have a big many-year project that everybody in the department works on, and it's a really important thing, and you don't mention it in this letter, you're not really doing your homework, and they're going to see that. They're going to say, but everybody here works on blank. If they're not interested, then they're not going to be a good fit for our school. So highlight these things in your cover letter. You should have multiple sections. One, you should have, here's the general about me, and then two, you should have, here is how I am a good fit for your organization. You should explicitly have those sections. So along those lines, one thing you will find useful that you may not know about are mail merges. So what a mail merge is it allows you to take data from a spreadsheet and pull it into a form letter so that you can fill in custom pieces in that form letter as you need it. If you're applying to more than one place, it is horribly confusing to keep your cover letter straight, because if you're applying to 15 schools, you're going to have 15 different cover letters, and any number of tiny little details will be different between all of them. And you can very easily flip around. I will tell you, nothing will turn off a school more than using the wrong name of a school in your cover letter. It happens more than you would think. Being on search committees, you will see the first 2 or 3 references to the school will be right, and then somewhere down below, wrong school, not the same place you're applying to. If you use a mail merge, you can get around this problem because the mail merge takes the human component out of it. You no longer have to worry about, did I remember to change every single set of words correctly? So as I was mentioning before, you want the same basic letter for every potential employer, your most polished core letter that says who you are and what you're about, but you want to have substantially different components on top of that. You want to have different addresses. You want to have different to lines. So, for example, if the ad says a specific a specific person's name as the chair of the search committee, mention that person's name. If they don't, go with your standard "Dear colleagues." You want the same basic intro to yourself, maybe it's slightly different. You definitely want different why I'm applying here. If you have one line that you specify for all research universities, that's kind of not really enough. You really need to target it in on each specific school. Why did you apply to this school? And I know for a lot of people at the graduate student level when you're applying, the reason why I'm applying here is because you had a job for me. That's as far as it goes. But you really have to think beyond that. You have to think, if I was offered a job here versus somewhere else, what is it about this place that would make me want to go here? Why would I want to work for this specific organization? You want different who I collaborate with sections. You don't want to mention faculty that aren't at the place you're applying to. And you want the same closing in the end, that final shot on why you're qualified and why people should hire you. So the advantage of this, again, you can create one Excel spreadsheet so you can change who each one's to in different columns. You can change the specific text you use here and then craft that all into a mass batch of emails or a mass batch of PDFs that you can then put where they need to go. Copy-paste is where job-losing failures occur. I mean, really, think about it. If all you're doing is you're copying one letter, you hit Control-A, select all, you copy it into a new document, and then you change the organization name in 3 places but forget one, your entire application is basically sunk at that point. You just shot yourself because you made a copy-paste error, which is silly. Don't do that. Don't use copy-paste. Use mail merges. All right. So researching the job. So in the academic past, your research on jobs was entirely the good old boy system. You would ask somebody you knew, and somebody you knew would happen to have a friend at the place you were applying, and you'd kind of weirdly gather information about what that job was about, and you'd probably get the job that way too. I remember hearing stories from my advisor in grad school about how he got a job, but there wasn't actually a search. Somebody just called him out of the blue and said, hey, there's a job, do you want it? And he just took it. That doesn't happen anymore. Now that kind of connection and those kind of research systems are all based on what you can find over the internet. You need to search about the schools you're applying to, every single one individually. You need to know about people. Who are the individual faculty members? What are their interests? And where are the overlaps? And where are the complements? Organizational and departmental mission statements. That's a new one for a lot of grad students. It's really easy to forget when you're located within a single department, like at ODU, for example, to not really realize where the distinction between your department and your college is. But there is one, and the distinction between your college and your university. Each of these groups has a mission, a particular thing they're trying to accomplish, trying to do. And when you apply, you need to know what those missions are. That's going to give you the kind of context for what people are emphasizing in this particular department, in this particular school, etc. So for example, in psychology, some departments are going to be more quantitatively, more mathematically oriented, and some are going to be more qualitatively oriented. And if you are applying to somewhere that's more qualitative, and all you talk about is how you use really cool statistics and math and such, and how you think that's advancing the field, they're not going to care, because that's not what they're about. That's not what they do. So you really want to figure out, what is this department's mission? And that doesn't mean lie on your cover letter. It just means to say, it kind of in the lines of what we were hearing earlier, is that who I am? Could that be slightly adjacent to who I am, or is that somebody totally different than who I am? And if it's somebody totally different, just don't apply. It's really hard as a grad student who's never had a job to say, I know there's a job, but I'm not going to apply. But that's the point where you make that decision, where you say, this is just too far different from me to apply. So that's one side, the people. The other side is you need to know about the place. If you're a serious candidate, you will be thinking about living there. I know, again, as a grad student, you're thinking, I'm going to live wherever there's a job, and that's about as far as that goes. But you need to actually think about, if I was really living here, what would I care about? What would I do? Am I going to buy a house? Would I get an apartment? Where would I live? What would I do? What do people do in their free time? What do people do on weekends? These are all questions that you start to think about when you're actually considering living somewhere, potentially for the rest of your life, which is the kind of decision that you're theoretically making here. So, for example, here, if you said, so there's a beach here in your interview, if you got to, and that would be a sign that you hadn't really done a whole lot of research on the place you were going. That's a really obvious example, but there are more subtle ones as well. So really research the area. Think about the housing market. Think about what people do in their free time. Think about whether or not there's a Walmart. If you're applying in a random place, there might not be a Walmart. And that's something that you should be aware of, how big the place you're applying is and what that means for how you would live. And make sure that in your letters and in your interview itself, you don't contradict something about that location. So I remember one example, when I was applying, I was talking about, they asked me, what do you like about living in Minneapolis, which is where I was at the time, and I said, oh, it's a nice big city, and there's access to all this stuff, and blah, 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 and I was, at the time, in Auburn, which is not a big city, which only, I think, recently got a Walmart. So the scale automatically put them off, and I realized my mistake seconds after saying that. But it was too late, because I just hadn't been connecting through that at that point. At that point, they were saying, this guy's not going to stay here more than a year, which was probably true, so there was no way I was getting hired at that point. You need to have remaining questions. Every frickin' person you talk to on an interview is going to ask you, so what questions do you have? Over and over and over and over and over and over again. So you need to have just in the back of your head a massive list of questions, which you're eventually going to repeat, because you're going to ask different people the same question lots of times, because you'll run out of questions. But you should at least have a good starter set of 30 or 40 things that you happen to be wondering about that you haven't yet got an answer to. And they have to be intelligent questions too. They can't be things like, so do you have a Walmart? They have to be things like, so how do you feel about living here? What do you think the situation is for school districts in this area? Is this a reasonable place to raise kids? These are the kind of questions that you should have.
Could I add something right there?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that kind of question can also be a way into finding out more about your colleagues.
Mm-hmm.
And so the examples that
Professor Nate Rich, that was your pseudonym, right?
Yes.
Provided terrific. You might even use it as an example, as a way to cultivate a question. Where do you see the department in 5 years? Or how is the research program at the university evolving? Those kinds of questions that give you a sense of, is this person optimistic about the future, and can you be part of that plan? So,
Yeah.
Good.
Great. So actually at interviews, we switched a little bit now. So that was all pre-interview kind of stuff to worry about. This is, now that you actually have an interview, how can technology help? Get a tablet or a smartphone and bring it with you. In the old days, this was a portfolio. You would bring like a legal pad that you could scroll notes on and so on and so forth. Bring a tablet, like at this point. You should have some little, you can get a Kindle Fire these days pretty cheap. So you bring a tablet and have all of this information that you found, faculty bios, all of your notes on this organization and why you want to work there, and just have it all available. You will randomly have 5 minutes of downtime constantly. You'll be sitting between meetings, you'll be shuffled between talking to faculty member A and faculty member B, and you'll have to just stand somewhere for 5 minutes. Really good opportunity to just pull out the tablet and say, wait, who am I talking to now? Oh, right, I remember there were collaboration opportunities with this person. I should talk about that when I talk to this person in 5 minutes. Just have that information available. Don't assume you'll remember anything, ever, because you will forget it, because it's a very stressful, very long period when you're doing an interview, and all that stuff will fly right out of your head. Have it accessible and have it where you can talk about it. Take notes as you're. Nobody in an interview is going to begrudge you looking down and typing something, so you're like, oh, that's really interesting, and you type it down, type it so that you remember it. That's totally fine. And take pictures, especially if you have a significant other. If you have a significant other, use your tablet and just every once in a while, click. This is the place that I might be living, honey. You want to see it? That's a totally reasonable thing to do, and no one. It's actually another sign that you're really paying attention, that you're really thinking, would I live here? Like the question of would my spouse or partner or whatever, would that person like it here? That you're actually taking pictures to show them, to say, would you like it here too? That means that you're really interested in the job. It's a really clear signal that you're actually thinking about what would it be like to live here. All right. Prepping for the job talk. We actually, great example already. Ask your contact about tech resources well in advance. It's nice to assume that they will have a laptop or a presentation system. They don't always. It's nice to assume they'll have a projector. They don't always. It's nice to assume all of these things, but you need to be prepared. Number one, make sure that there's actually a presentation with a projector, because that does happen where there's not one. If there is, ask, do you need to bring a laptop? Do you need to bring a USB drive? Figure out what their preference is. But then, regardless of all of that, prepare in as many ways as possible. Bring your own laptop. If you don't need it, just leave it in your hotel room, but it needs to be there just in case something changes. Bring a USB drive regardless. Keep it in your pocket and email yourself your presentation, and you can download as a last resort if you absolutely have to.
If you have a Mac, bring your own dongle. I was just on 2 search committees, and I had to be the one who provided the dongle for them.
Yeah, Mac PC is the source of so many problems. Yeah. Create backups for anything you need on the internet. Some fields are more internet heavy than others. So, for example, if you're in an area where you want to show a video demonstration off of a website, as part of your talk, you need to have a local version of that. Period. If you think you need to be on the internet, don't assume you'll have access to it. Create a video of yourself doing the task, so just in case there is no internet access, you still have something to show people. So prep. So you have to really, it's not even super fair, because if, for example, you have a Mac and the other candidate doesn't have a Mac, but then the Mac user forgets their special dongle converter, that's going to leave a worse impression of that person, even though the first person didn't need to be as prepared. It's really not fair, but you really have to prepare just in case. That's it. So those are my sets of tips. I hope you have found that useful, both pre-interview and during. Good.
Thank you. And to really kind of wrap up everything, Katrina Stevens will kind of give you broader tips and strategies from the trenches. So, welcome, Katrina.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Katrina Stevens, and I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Urban Studies and Public Administration. I'm in the College of Business and Public Administration. I went on the market in 2009, so this is my 4th year here at Old Dominion University. A lot of what I had prepared for today has already been said, but I do have some little tidbits from the personal standpoint that I hope will be helpful. Because even though I went on the market 5 years ago, it is still very fresh in my mind. It's a hugely, hugely stressful experience, something you don't forget. Okay, I want you to imagine this scenario. You've been job searching for approximately 3 months now, and the telephone rings, you answer the phone. It's someone from Seattle University, and they say, oh, we're interested in you. Are you still available for this position? Of course I am. Yes, I am. And you set up a phone interview. So you will almost always start the interview process with a phone interview, or now they use Skype and Adobe Connect. But when I was on the market in 2009, you didn't see that. But now there's a lot of Skype interviews, Adobe Connect interviews. So now what? What should you do? I'm going to give you just a few little pointers. Okay, I put together a to-do list before the interview. I'm really big on lists, so a lot of what I do relates to making lists. The first thing, calm your nerves. Whew. Don't let anxiety get the best of you. They called you for a reason. They're interested in you because your CV and your packet impressed them. So you have a lot to show them. You just need to get organized. I'm a firm believer in organization decreasing anxiety. Okay, prepare for the phone or the Skype interview. We've already covered this. Review their department website in great detail. But back to my lists, if I were you, I would make a cheat sheet that can sit next to you, because with the phone or Skype interview, you can be sitting right there and you can look at it. Of course, with faculty and staff names. And I think this is important. As many of you know, staff members are often the soul of a department. And so you want to recognize that. Put staff names down as well. Courses offered by the department. Note the courses offered and star next to the ones that you may be able to teach. Department mission has already been mentioned, and any other interesting or relevant information. For example, Seattle University has I believe it's a Center for Public Service, and they're really involved with that, and you want to make note of those sorts of things. Familiarize yourself with the university. How big is the university? How many colleges do they have? Of course, Google the town name. We already went over this. Become familiar with the area. Then make a list of questions that you can ask them and questions that they might ask you, and I'll go into more detail in a minute. And of course, practice using Skype or Adobe Connect before you actually have the interview. Practice with your friends. All right, questions that you can ask them. For example, what are criteria for tenure? Do faculty work together on research projects? Is there an expectation to write grants? Are there teaching opportunities in the summer? What is the makeup of the student body? What kind of support do you offer new faculty? And this is in reference to teaching assistants or research assistants. Do they offer summer pay when you first get there? That kind of thing. Will they give you a computer? Are there classes that rotate between faculty? What's the typical teaching load? Do you have questions about my teaching or research? And then potential questions that they might ask you. What is your research agenda for the next 2 to 4 years? What do you want to teach? Where would you publish your work? You should also, on your cheat sheet, have a list of journals that are part of your field, so you can quickly throw out the names of journals. What associations do you belong to? You're prepared to teach at night. What will you bring to this program? Why do you want to move here? Do you plan to stay here more than a year or two? And that question puts you on the spot, so you need to be prepared for that. And what do you think are important components of advising? This list is really short. When I went on the market, I searched the internet. I just simply Googled what questions will be asked during an interview and copy-pasted into a 3-page single-space list. So you can really go over that and practice and have questions just, on hand, right there when you need them. Okay, so some tips for the actual interview. Practice saying faculty and staff names. And this sounds a little silly, but it is really important because sometimes there are names that are difficult to pronounce, and if you're not sure, ask your friends. How do you think you pronounce this name? And if it's during the phone interview, say, I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce your name correctly, or can you please tell me how you correctly say your name, just to be respectful. Appear confident, but not like you have a huge ego. So you want to show them, I'm qualified, I will be a good candidate for you, I will fit in really well, but don't make them think, oh my goodness, this person thinks that they're the best thing ever. So you need to find a good balance there. Appear lighthearted. Make sure that they know you are personable and you're not a dud. So in your presentation, add in a few comments here and there that are lighthearted, or on the phone, lightly laugh at some point. Just show that you're not a really serious person, but that you can fit in well as a colleague, as a person. As the other people on the panel have said, they're looking at your credentials, but they also want to know that you as a person fit in well. So you want to show that. Don't be afraid to ask questions, and if you have your questions handy in your cheat sheet, they'll be right there. Avoid talking about your personal life in the phone interview and in person. It's just not necessary. You don't need to talk about your personal life, and they most likely will not ask you about your personal life. Make it seem as though this is the job for you. You really, really want this job, even if you don't. And there are cases where you will interview even if you don't really want the job. Perhaps it'll be for experience, or perhaps it's a last resort interview. You never know. But regardless, this is the job you want. Okay, so next, assuming you get an invitation to visit the campus, preparing your job talk, and I'll go over this quickly because we've already covered many of these, but your job talk, general format here, introduction, background, through the methods, to the limitations, but I would recommend that you also include 3 additional slides. One being your teaching philosophy, we mentioned that already, your research agenda, and most departments, my field is public administration, and we are really interested in your research agenda, and many other departments are as well. But then your commitment to service. Schedule a practice job talk. This has already been mentioned. Invite your dissertation committee, your colleagues, your PhD students in the program, other faculty. This will be incredibly helpful for you. They will ask questions that you hadn't thought of, but will come up during the interview, I guarantee. Okay, this is just an example of what a teaching philosophy slide might look like. It's hard to put this together because your teaching philosophy is something in writing that you can put together many thoughts that sound really good together, and it's hard to often transfer that into a slide. But you could just highlight 4 main things that are important to you and then elaborate a little more, like student involvement, the learning environment you like to create, your commitment towards students, your use of technology in the classroom, and just briefly go over that during your presentation. Your research agenda slide might look something like this, and it depends on where you are in the process. If you're just starting out, instead of in progress, submitted, accepted, you might have something like started, writing, submitted to a journal. But this is just a very quick picture of where your papers stand, but also your research interests. So in progress, you could say something like, I'm interested in policy subsystems and policy brokers, and I'm currently writing a paper on that topic. Then I move to submitted. I have papers submitted in these areas to various journals. Be sure to spout out the names of journals. That's very important. And then I also have papers that have been accepted in these areas of research to these journals. So it just shows, by talking about the areas of research, you show the depth and breadth of what you can do. This is also an example of a commitment to service slide that you might include. At the top, this is the college mission. You could put the department mission if that's more appropriate, of course. Usually service is broken down into university service, professional service, and community service. And again, there's so much you could include on a slide like this. But if you just, snapshot right there, and you can give a few examples of each type of service you plan to do. Okay, and then finally, last minute considerations. Well, what if you haven't finished your dissertation yet? Then what should you do? If you're going on these job talks, you're trying to make yourself seem like you're ready to go into the field, but you haven't finished your dissertation. And that's okay. My recommendation would be that you should have your data collected by the time you go on the market, so that you can say, I'm in the process of writing my results. These are my preliminary results, and I will have my dissertation completed and defended by May. You want to really, if you're not done with your dissertation yet, you really, really want to emphasize a timeline so that they know you are on track to finish before you get there. If you're not, many times they will hire you as an instructor if you haven't finished your dissertation yet, and once you get there, you have proof you finished, they bump you up to the assistant professor level. Expect to have the same conversation over and over and over, and this has been mentioned already. You could meet 15 different people in one day individually. So you may be asking the same questions to every single person, and that's okay. And it will, for you, start to get a little boring, but it's all right because you need to fill the time, and you also will get different pieces of information from different people. Expect to be completely exhausted. This experience in a job interview is, the second you are picked up at the airport, it's go time, you are on, you have no minute to rest. Really. You don't even sleep at night because you're anxious about it. So expect to be exhausted. That is something that surprised me. Expect to be hungry. This is something else that surprised me. Even though you're having dinner and then breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and then maybe breakfast the next day, it's a lot of eating time with people, but you're probably not eating much because you're talking a lot. Or if you're like me, when you get anxious, you're not hungry. So order small meals, something that's easy to eat, and also put snacks in your bag. And when you go to the bathroom, eat a snack. This is something that I learned with all of my interviews, and it may sound really silly, but you need to keep the energy going. So whenever you get a chance, have a little snack. Expect to walk a lot. We already mentioned wearing appropriate clothes, but women, high heels, it's really tough because you'll be walking around campus, so wear short heels if you can. And also a respectable outfit. And for men, one thing I've noticed is that men tend to overdress in terms of they'll wear a long sleeve shirt and then a sport coat, and then they'll sweat a lot during the interview, which is not really pleasant to watch as someone sitting in the audience. So think about that before you go. Also with women, I would suggest a pantsuit rather than a skirt suit, and also wear something that's a little higher cut because you don't want to be distracting people with your clothes, like that was already mentioned.
I have something right there. Take your cue from the chair of the search committee. So if, let's say the chair is a male, and he sits down and takes off his jacket, you can take off your jacket. If the chair of the search committee is female and does the same or takes off her sweater or whatever, and it is warm, feel free to do that. But if everyone is saying somewhat formally dressed, then I would say stay formally dressed and sweat it out, unfortunately, but it'll be over soon enough.
Yeah, yeah.
But again, it's always, and this is just good business practice. Generally, whoever has the most power in the room is the one who kind of dictates, how casual or formal the encounter is going to be.
Yeah. And sometimes it's hard to know. You can try and predict what the dress will be like when you go there. And for an example, I'm from Denver, Colorado, and the city is, kind of hip and city-ish. And I interviewed at a very small university in North Carolina that was in the mountains. Well, I wore my city outfit to the interview, and I get there, and they're all dressed in jeans and tucked in little collared shirts that are not dressy at all. And I felt out of place. I really felt out of place, and I think that in part contributed to me not getting the job because they didn't see me as one of them. So it's just, you can't always anticipate that, but just do the best you can. And that's it. Most importantly, be yourself. And thank you for listening, and good luck in the future.
All right, thank you very much. We've had some really good pieces of advice, strategies. What we want to do next is open up the floor for question and answer. And actually, if you don't mind, maybe we get everybody kind of squish over there so we don't have to move the microphone around too much.
And I'm just going to ask if everyone can repeat the question so the online audience and the online audience can hear it.
And actually, to kind of get us started, there was a question from the Adobe Connect meeting room. So we'll start with that, and then as the audience has questions, we'll get to those as well.
And the person in the Adobe Connect, is it better, so talking about the cover letter, is it better to have a section telling how my research fits, or the or really isn't here. Basically, the question was, how do I fit everything that is being suggested in the cover letter with the 2-page?
Yeah, please. I said 2 pages, and that's based on my own experience, mostly on the other side of the table because it's been some years since I've applied. But what do you think?
Well, I mean, that varies by department, too. I mean, I think we usually see 1-page letters, which is a lot to cram in. I mean, in some ways, the cover letter is sort of exemplifies what is the tightest, most concise writing you are capable of. I don't know that there's any shortcut to it. It's just something that has to be, and it's part of why I said something has to be really polished, is, I mean, that's something that you read over and over and over again and say, I don't need these 3 words, I can say this in a better way. And just spending a lot of time with it.
I think the 2-letter is standard, 2-page letter. And for me, if you go through the job search ad very closely, they will say, we're looking for someone who is experienced in public finance and nonprofit organizations. Well, if you have a lot of research, that you can share. You just need to narrow it down to those specific topics. So just let the ad guide you and help you narrow down everything into 2 pages. You should be able to do that. 2 pages is a lot, single-spaced.
Well, and I think one of the things that we kind of missed was the search committee perspective. And having served on multiple search committees, I think 2 pages is the maximum that I'm willing to read. And when there are 6 pages, you're just kind of like, okay, if you can't tell me in 2 pages, I really don't want to have to very closely read 6 pages and distill out of that why you're a good fit. So I think 2 pages is standard. Maybe, you know, it might be different in different fields. And so Elaine has something to
Well,
add
I
as well.
wanted you, since you're up there, but no one's kind of mentioned the fact that the search committee has to be guided at this point in time by the EEO guidelines. That is that ad. And you might want to elaborate on the fact and make them aware of just how critical that is and legally what the search committee has to do.
Well, so kind of given that we were kind of missing the search committee perspective, one of the big things is that search committees, in evaluating our candidates, we have to go by what the job ad specifies. So we might have a great candidate on paper who does social policy, but if we're in public administration and we want somebody to do transportation policy, it might be a great person with the most amazing research record. But if it doesn't fit our particular job ad, that's not going to be a good fit. So we will actually look, I don't know about other departments, we actually have a matrix.
Yes,
When
right.
we do search committees, right? We have a matrix with all of the different criteria that are spelled out in the ad. And we might rate each candidate on a scale from 1 to 5 according to how well they meet each of those criteria. So there might be really good things that you do if it's not part of the job ad. It's the search committee very rarely takes that into consideration.
Right.
And when we fill out that matrix, we pay attention to the cover letter.
Right.
So,
Yeah, if it says minimum 3 years teaching experience, don't apply for the job if you only have 2. If it says teaching experience beyond the level of teaching assistant, again, if you've not been an instructor of record, don't apply for that job. They're looking for ways to cut the number of applications they have to consider. And so the specific language in the ad is critical. And I'll say one more thing. I know Shelley wants to jump in. Be careful about degrees as well. They'll ask for a PhD in, I'm going to tread into an area that I don't know a whole lot about, but a PhD in psychology. But if they say they want a PhD in psychology with an industrial organization emphasis, then don't apply if your specialty is child psychology. It's just that's a given, but again, committees must abide by the letter of the job description.
And it can play out in really unfortunate ways. I mean, it's usually why in those ads you see or related fields always tacked on at the end of that statement.
Sure.
Because if we said, for example, must have a degree in social psychology, and then someone else comes in with a degree in clinical, but now does social work and is really great, we still can't bring them in because that ad is ironclad.
Right.
So even if, oh wait, the spirit of the ad was different, it doesn't matter. It's whatever the words on that paper say. So if there's something where you definitively do not meet a requirement, it is just not worthwhile to even apply.
Yeah.
I just wanted to remind on the 2-page limit as well as everything you put in it, not wanting the shoebox, having realized that those committees are usually reading lots of job ads. I've been on committees that had over 200 applicants, and they're usually doing it at the end of the day. And so that's another reason they don't, at 2 pages I stop, because it's like I'm looking at 150 more 2-page cover letters I have to read. And that was when I was at community college, but that's another reason to stick to what was there and to stick with what they called for, because, and even the order in which they called for it. If they first said, I want 3 years of teaching experience, and then said, I want teaching with technology experience, you put it in the letter in that order.
so Lee, did you have something to add, or?
Could I amplify one thing I forgot to mention in my presentation? Does everyone know what an HBCU is? Okay, just to be sure, historically black college and university, one of the legacies of segregation is that many public but also private colleges have a focus on education for African Americans. And as with some of the religious institutions I mentioned, everyone has an open hiring policy and do not discriminate based on any kind of background. And so if the institution seems like it will be a good fit, go ahead and make the application no matter what your background. And just to weigh that as you're making, as you're casting your net for different positions. Yeah. Okay.
Was there a second part to that question, Shelley?
No, it was really about two-page and getting everything in there.
Are there other questions? This one back here.
I'm just wondering, now that we're a grad student and everything, so when we have a website, what kind of information would you suggest that we include on it? Publications, just basic information, or should we include like history, things like that?
Okay, so the question is, as a graduate student going on the market, what types of information should go on your individual website?
Yeah, well, I mean, it really is an expanded vita. So it should certainly have all the credentials that you have earned up to that point and your publication lists and that sort of thing. But it also gives you the opportunity to project forward, where it's one of the things that hiring committees and are going to worry about is that your research program, talking about research universities at least, that your research program is distinct from your advisors. So a website actually offers you a really good opportunity to say, this is who I am as an individual. Here are the things that I want to do. Here's the research that I am all about. That kind of information I think is really important to emphasize. So yeah, I would say it's essentially, it's a vita in a slightly different format, but with just a little more emphasis about your future directions.
What about the headshot?
What about the headshot?
Should it be done professionally, or can it be, essentially, it shouldn't be a selfie, obviously, but how do you need to present yourself pictorially on that website?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of research on that. So, I mean, you don't want, well, if you look at other faculty, if you look at existing faculty websites, you're going to see a lot of variance in how people present themselves on the internet, which is partially a legacy from people that created their websites in the 90s, for example. So you'll see people that say, I'm a tenured faculty member and I like rock climbing, and so my professional website has a massive section on rock climbing for some reason, which is fine if it's just there to inform other people about who you are, but as a grad student you don't really have that kind of latitude. So you do have to think about professionalism in a couple of senses. One is the picture, in that you don't want just a random photo that you've come across. I actually chose one. The shot that you actually saw on my website there was one from my wedding, which I feel really kind of weird about this. I cropped my wife out of that picture, and then because it's the best picture I had of myself at the time, so I cropped my wife out and used that as my photo. So that, I mean, again, as a poor grad student who couldn't afford professional photography, that was the best option I had available at that time. But that also applies to the general website, is you don't want what I would call a 90s-tastic website with weird contrasting colors and blinking, and it needs to be a professional look. The easiest way to do that is to just look around the web and say whose professional website impresses me and who doesn't, and what do I want mine to look like to kind of represent that.
And if you're worried you won't have enough information to put on there at this point in your career, I've seen students put things like listing all of the classes they've taken in their PhD program and attaching final papers as well, just to give them an example of your body of knowledge, and also, writing sample.
Well, how many of you are familiar with academia.edu? I actually used, when I went on the market a while back, academia.edu, what had just been started, but it was a tool for me to go find out a little bit more about the different faculty members.
Okay.
And academia.edu is free, and it has specific templates that faculty members can use and fill out different areas. And so I don't have my own website, but I basically use academia.edu. I upload my CV, I periodically change working papers, and so it, as part of it, because it has a set format, it kind of conforms to what a lot of other academics websites look like. So that might also be a free tool that graduate students can use. But I'm a firm believer in the picture has to be professional.
Okay.
Because sometimes I just look at, I look at sometimes newsletters going, they use that picture? Really?
Well, professional, but not to the point where you look like an anchor for, WKMU in
Right,
Wichita.
no, yeah.
Right.
But I think because this is the professional, this is your professional face that you're using to sell yourself, more thought needs to be put into.
Right.
If in doubt, my philosophy is don't put a picture.
Yeah.
You know, and it does vary a bit by discipline. So in business, for example, you better look professional. But if you're a mathematician, then if you look like a mathematician, that might help you. I don't know. It's going to vary a little bit. I want to dovetail a little bit off of academia.edu. There are really two major academic social network sites now. One is academia.edu. The other is called ResearchGate. So if you're not on those already, I would join those, both of them. Even if it's not your primary academic website, you want to be present on those.
Yeah. There's a hand somewhere in the
Was
middle
there
there.
another question?
My question.
Okay.
LinkedIn did not seem to be popular with the group here.
LinkedIn.
I
Yeah.
never use. I'm on it, but I
Yeah.
never use it ever.
I want to say I get like dozens of requests, like all the time, and it's mainly from people here at the university. For some reason, it's like LinkedIn. You can call me on the phone, but it seems to me, at least for my cohort, which is older than the rest, people are using it a lot. Yeah.
But what are they using it for?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know why they want to talk to me or link up with me. Although it's, and the only time I ever go on is to accept a professional request. But it seems to me that they're using it, or maybe they're just playing with it. I don't know.
It varies again a lot by individual field. So LinkedIn, I mean, part of the problem with social media is there is not any single place you can point to say this is where people are, and individual fields will kind of gravitate toward one way to communicate. What most academic fields do are listservs, so that's where you see most communication. But there's some fields, like I'm part of a group called Gaming, Learning, and Society, and that's largely LinkedIn based, just because that happens to be where they are.
Yeah.
So you really have to think about what your research area is and where those people that you're trying to get a job from are likely to be talking.
And someone online said that the business school is encouraging students to have LinkedIn accounts for private sector employment, which makes sense.
Okay.
Other questions? So are there any other, so we didn't quite get to have the presentation on the search committee perspective, but were there certain things that you might want to impart wisdom from kind of the search committee perspective, the what not to do? If I'm a search committee chair, what automatically disqualifies, or what automatically puts someone lower down on my applicant list?
If I could offer some general advice, is look outside of yourself during the process. And so people want to hire a good colleague. They want someone who is collaborative, but also not just in terms of research, but in terms of the business of the university. So in terms of advising, in terms of committee work, in terms of building a curriculum, building a graduate program, the kinds of things that will raise the profile of the department. And the selfish candidate whose first question is about salary or about personal things that are just kind of, in the larger scheme, kind of trivial and meaningless. Where can I find, a decent, place for seafood? And you're asking that in Manhattan, Kansas, and I've been to Manhattan, Kansas, and I don't recall seeing a seafood restaurant. That's going to be a turnoff. Even more so, I would say, than maybe the miscalculation in terms of the outfit, which don't underestimate that. That can play into it too. But you wouldn't know. I mean, truly. But some things you can anticipate, and try to look beyond yourself.
I think the biggest. Go ahead, Katrina.
I was just going to say, from a woman's perspective, if you have children, don't mention that. If you are planning on having a baby, don't mention that. If you're pregnant, don't mention that. Even if you are visibly pregnant, don't talk about it. I'm serious. That sounds ridiculous, I know, but it's very important. And even though you don't want it to happen, people do think of women differently than men, and certainly with children, that your time's going to be taken away from your commitment to the department. I've seen it happen, so just avoid that.
Yeah, the way that this plays out is often very strange, because at these faculty meetings, people will just bring up random things about candidates that they liked or did not like, and it becomes this kind of freewheeling discussion. So you really have to manage the impression of every individual. It's not that you're in general going to disturb the department by mentioning, for example, that you have kids or might have kids, but rather there might be that one person that just really has some prejudices and then decides to try to tear you down in that meeting. Like it's weird stuff like that happens. So this is why you have to be cautious from so many different directions.
So that reminds me one question from my one interview. They asked me, how do you balance your family life and your work? If I cannot imagine, if I don't talk about my kid, how can I share my experience about it?
It's a really unfair question, too.
Yeah, and
they should ask that. Yeah.
Then you usually do not hear that question. I mean, there are guidelines in place for departments not to ask those types of questions. So the fact that they did ask you that, I'm surprised. It's usually something more vague, like, is there anything that might prevent you from taking this position? It's usually something like that.
Right.
I'm really surprised they asked that up front.
But I think that part of the challenge of an interview, though, is how do you couch responses so you're still responsive to the question without raising these red flags.
I mean, the general rule, I think, is be as vague as they are.
Yeah. Okay.
Because the question will be things, I know what kind of question you're talking about, and the question is often something like, so, how do you spend your free time? Under the guise of, I'm just trying to make friendly conversation with you. And just never volunteer more information than they're actually asking for. So if they're saying, so how do you spend your free time? And your automatic response is,
Microbars.
Your automatic response is that you like to spend time with kids, then just say, oh, I try to maintain certain hours, and I try to, you don't give any more information than you're given. That'd be my recommendation.
Could I pose a hypothetical for the panel? If I am in a same-sex partnership, and I really want to tease out from my colleagues how accepted I would feel as part of the departmental family, let's say. How do I do that while at the same time not revealing too much about myself personally? Because I think that would be important if I were to, let's say, communicate that to the partner. This is a place where I think we could build a life, and that's on the radar now, and I think we. How do we do it? Yes?
How should they know that they don't have to answer some questions?
Well, that's a question that
Yeah. Actually, could we finish this one question first, and then, Yeah, what do you think?
I think it's an important question to kind of get a gauge on. I'm not exactly sure how you would put it out there. I think
I'm not either. So.
I mean, I think if I were in that position, I would probably seek out campus resources first. If they have,
and then maybe do your research ahead of time to see if there's a caucus or there's that sort of thing. Yeah. To answer the question from the floor, if the question is inappropriate as the interviewee, I think you have to do your best to deflect it politely, without necessarily indicating that you were offended, even though you might be very upset by the question. And the vague answer, which I think Shelley or Katrina had said may be the best way to go. What else? In other words, don't say, I can't believe you asked me that.
Yeah.
Because that's clearly that's not going to bode well. On the other hand, that's a good sign maybe for you that this place is not going to be where I want to be for the next 5 years. Yeah.
Maybe. I mean, if you get those kind of questions from a lot of people,
or sometimes it's one jerk. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't discount an entire department because of one bad interview experience. But it is a problem in the broader hiring literature. If you want to get hired, you can't call people out on being unethical. So that you can never even hint really. If you want to maintain your chances of being hired, you can't hint that saying like I just choose not to answer that question, because however benignly you try to say it, like, oh, I don't know if they'll feel comfortable answering that, that can still be used against you in the way that I was describing earlier. So trying to walk around it and kind of give an answer will, for most people you're talking to, remind them that they're not supposed to ask that question in the first place. And they say, oh, how about, you think your kids will be fine here, and then you walk around that answer, then you'll remind that person, oh, right, I wasn't supposed to ask that. Because remember, the people you're talking to are human also, so they make mistakes. And if you encounter somebody that just keeps hammering at it, then that's a much harder situation. Right. But in my experience, that's pretty rare.
Yeah, from my experience, because I have my specialty in human resource, there are illegal questions when you ask about kids, social status, religion, something like that. So the interview has to avoid some questions. And do I have, as this is my specialty, to say, it is illegal question or something like that?
Well, I think that's what Richard's trying to get at is you don't want to put the interviewer in that position.
Yeah.
Yeah, but.
Well, the problem that you encounter is that the people you're talking to are not trained interviewers. They don't have human resources backgrounds. They're just random faculty. And some of them may have been through training to talk about what they're allowed to ask and what they're not, but many won't. Anybody that's never sat on a search committee before will just be kind of guessing as to what's appropriate to talk to you about, and that's where you run into trouble usually.
And I even want to say, on the human angle, I had that exact moment where I was so excited about this candidate, and I just wanted to talk to them and find out things, and it got into questions of fit. And then at one point, as we're going down the path, I had the click, oh, I wasn't supposed to be asking that. And it really was very much a human moment. Yeah. It was a moment of, I'm ecstatic with this person, I would love to work with this person. And yeah, but it didn't mean that it still wasn't appropriate.
Right.
And it wasn't intentional to somehow be like, I really want to know this.
Did that person come to campus?
Yes, we hired them.
Excellent. Okay, so happy ending. Happy ending.
Yeah,
okay.
happy ending.
Okay.
Would the way you handle that situation be different if instead of meeting with potential faculty members, often in the interview you meet with a group of current graduate students who haven't gone through the training?
Right, sure. Yeah.
Or would you kind of do the same thing you do with a faculty member, where you just kind of politely obey?
Grad students are a landmine in those things. You never know how a grad student talk is going to go. The advantage to it is I think you can more reasonably say that you're not going to answer something to a grad student than you can to the faculty, because the grad students aren't as directly involved in that decision-making process.
So something like, oh, I really couldn't say.
Yeah.
Or something. But in a way that's not off-putting or anything.
Yeah, rather than a workaround and more gentle deflection. Like, oh, and then just stop. That's how I would probably do it.
But I will say, the grad students, you're right, the grad students are a landmine. You never know how much input they actually have in the process.
Right.
And so, there might be a little bit more of the evasiveness that comes across, but sometimes that also is misconstrued as, well, grad students are beneath this person,
Right.
So it's a really difficult, because you're in a position where it's harder to relate to them, because now you want to be hired as a faculty member. So it's So it's a different kind of relating to the graduate students in
Oh,
the
yeah.
interview setting.
Yeah, that's like the most awkward experience
It's very awkward.
especially when you're a grad student and you're talking to other grad students, some of which may be taking longer for their degrees than
Sure,
you, some
right.
of which may be on the market with you. Oh, that's terrible. I remember that being an awful experience.
I think it is awkward, but I think the most important thing to remember in that situation is just treat them like an equal other person. That's the approach I always took, because yes, it is awkward, but if you just talk to them like just you'd talk to anyone else, then
Yeah, but I remember when I went the first time, the question I got was, "What is your advising style?" Which, as a grad student, hadn't really advised anybody, so I just kind of guessed. And it's really after even a single year of working as faculty, you no longer have this problem. But that very first time out, it's just really, really difficult to think of yourself simultaneously, almost as being both a grad student and essentially faculty. The advice I would probably give is just to really think of yourself as faculty, because usually grad students will see you that way because you're potentially coming there to be faculty, so even though you aren't now, they're still going to kind of see you as faculty.
and you can anticipate those questions, put them on your list of questions in practice.
Yeah.
Shelley, there's a question from
Yes, there's a question online. So most universities send this after you've applied, and it's a form that starts with, "We would appreciate your completion and return of the enclosed applicant information request." Does filling that out impact their decisions in selecting candidates?
No.
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 The
It's
department
data
usually doesn't
gathering.
see it.
Yeah, and generally it's reported by a central office, so it's for statistical purposes only, really. Yeah. Got a.
Yes, have you ever encountered a job candidate who is in the National Guard, Reserve, or similar component of the drilling military, weekend a month,
Yeah,
in
sure.
the summer? And how do you make sure that you're not illegally prejudiced against that person because of their legal commitment?
Wow.
But the only time I've been in that kind of position was for a research staff, and so there weren't going to be a lot of additional commitments beyond a 40-hour research project and a duration.
And
so
very few universities require weekend commitments for teaching, so it shouldn't normally come up. I would say it's something that, as an applicant, you can volunteer during the interview process, and I don't think it would necessarily hinder any of your prospects. Actually, they would probably find it, make you a more interesting candidate. In many ways.
Well, I mean, I would consider it like any other extracurricular activity, essentially. So, like, I play piano. Maybe I'd want to mention that, and maybe I wouldn't. But that's the kind of decision. You just kind of have to feel out the department and figure out if that's useful information to volunteer. So, in an area like this, for example, I think that would be a strength.
But it is a regular commitment. So there's the schedule thing, which most.
It wouldn't interfere with work duties, though, would it?
It shouldn't. Yeah, it shouldn't.
Yeah.
But because it's not volunteer, I mean, it is required. Yeah. Yeah.
I was going to say, that's also where you should be able to do some homework with the department website. So you should be able to see, does the department every year or every semester host some weekend event? Then that would become...
Yeah, and you would just volunteer that, I would say. Yeah. Did you have a follow-up?
I bring that up because it doesn't seem fair to me to be applying for a job and not to have the disclosure of, if there's a disaster, I'm out of here.
Correct, right. Right.
Well, and then this comment may address that. It even kind of puts together Robert's earlier hypothetical. Be aware that it's the search committee that cannot ask you these questions legally.
Right.
You can decide to disclose whatever you think is appropriate. And you can give that thought ahead of time. If this really looks like a good fit and a job that you might in fact want, you want to begin to find out whether it's going to be a comfortable place for you personally as well as professionally. So at some point in the process, whether maybe in the interview, maybe later on in the negotiations, you want to make sure that this fit is going to work that way as well, and that may involve some disclosure on your part. Once you say something, then the search committee can respond. So if you volunteer, you have children, then the search committee can say, tell me about it, kind of thing. They can't probe.
Right.
It's got to be very neutral, but that's something that's really kind of
Okay, well, in the interest of time, I know Richard has to leave for class, right? So I want to thank our panelists for their great advice, information. Hopefully I'm hoping it's something that will help our student prospects as they go in the job market. So thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.